My most vivid memories come from that trip. I mean, how could I possibly forget? But what I remember is different from normal remembering. I can still smell the tunnel so much it makes my throat feel gritty and damp. I see my dream like it was a movie and feel the confusion and terror that stung my heart as soon as I laid eyes on that picture frame. It started like any other Boy Scout outing, cramped in a car with a kid that you barely knew, driving for multiple hours without being allowed to use your phone, and trying to chat with an adult chaperone who wanted to be there even less than you did. This time was different though. This time I was actually excited about the outing, for no other reason than where we were staying. I had lived a few hours from Detroit my entire life, and despite frequent trips there, I still felt like I had never truly seen the city. The scout leaders announced to the troop that we were going to stay overnight in the barracks of the historic Fort Wayne, to the delight of all the boys who were sick of sleeping in tents during thunderstorms. I knew what the word fort meant in the context of pillows and blankets, but I had never seen a military fort. Before we even pulled into the parking lot, I could already tell that this was going to be more interesting to me than any of the other boys. History had always been one of my favorite subjects, and I was a big fan of a Civil War style video game back home, so being here was like seeing the game come to life. Before you could even find a place to park, you could see cannons, tanks, guns, bullets, and ammo on display all over the fort's entrance walls. To a 12-year-old, this was exciting, and my mind ignored any historical relevance for pictures of cannons firing and tanks rolling over the hills. When we were all inside and settled, an old man with a long beard who looked like he had never done anything except to give the same tour greeted us with a short monologue about the historical importance of the fort, as well as listing some rules about the preservation of the area. He also mentioned a few areas that were not to be explored without an adult present. Most importantly, the tunnels. At the mention of the word tunnels, I was at the edge of my seat, my excitement barely contained. I listened in awe as the old man explained that there were hundreds of feet of tunnel buried underneath the dirt mounds that created the walls of the fort. The only thing in my mind heading to bed that night was the thought of those tunnels, how badly I wanted to see and explore them. Sadly for me, I would soon get my wish. The dream I had that night was so vivid I could have sworn I was watching a movie. The dream started off normal, soldiers marching, pitching tents, moving with their weaponry and saluting to their superior, but then a rain of artillery began raining from the heavens as the result of an unknown enemy. Men were immediately killed, their body parts blown apart and strewn across the yard so that it seemed it was impossible to find what belonged to who. The cannons and bullets continued to rain down as the soldiers in the yard ran for cover, eventually pouring in mass into the tunnels, with the final soldier being the commander and the one to shut the large gates, protecting his men. I woke up in a sweat, alarmed at the grotesque nature of my dream and the pain that I could feel for my imaginary soldiers. I comforted myself in knowing that what I saw was only just a dream, in addition to being historically inaccurate. The fort we were staying in never saw any combat like the kind that I saw in my dream, and therefore a mass death never really happened. On the tour of the surrounding area the next day, I pointed out to the old man that we were passing multiple fenced-off areas of dirt and hills, each only being about as long and wide as a semi-truck. The guide informed me that the fort was constructed on native land, and the mounds that were fenced off were ancient burial sites where the tribes that lived here would bury their dead. The answer was satisfactory to me, but the old man continued. He said that the tribes that lived here told the original builders of the fort that they could not have the land before they were even asked for it. Apparently, according to legend, the native elders have seen the construction of the fort and the seizure of their land in a dream. This struck me as odd. That afternoon, we were given free time, so I immediately ran over to my only real friend in the troop, Ethan. Ethan and I talked about what we had seen that day. We looked over the walls at the passing boats on the river, but we were quickly bored. The only thing that interested us was the tunnels, so we did what any 12-year-old boy would do and we snuck inside. It wasn't exactly a daring maneuver. The entrance to the tunnels was out of sight of everyone else, and the doors were too heavy to open and close every day, so they permanently remained open. We were fully prepared to accept the consequences of being caught if it meant we could explore the tunnels just once. Barely stepping inside the tunnels and taking my first breath reminded me of my dream. It had the stench of rust, wet stone, and old leather. The tunnels were only lit by the dim rays of sun that poured through the gun nests and breaks in the outer wall. Ethan and I made it down the first hallway and were presented with a fork in the path. The left side led straight against the wall, with a small ammo room at the end resulting in a dead end, while the right side had a staircase that led down into more storage and utility-based tunnels. Being the adventurers we were, we went down. The tunnel now separated into 6 or 7 rooms that were all barely large enough to fit a refrigerator. We were insistent on exploring all of the empty rooms for no other reason than to satisfy our curiosity. I entered the final room at the end of the tunnel, inspected it, and turned around, eager to find what the left path awaited. I called Ethan and spun around to begin my departure, but to my surprise, I did not see my friend. Ethan was nowhere to be found. I glanced inside each of the other rooms to see if he was there, but he had just vanished. My confusion and panic was interrupted when I heard a voice from the entrance of the tunnels, proclaiming that it was time for dinner and everyone was to report back to the yard. Now, with a moment to think, I realized that I had just seen Ethan seconds prior to his disappearance. I figured he went back up the stone steps to explore the second tunnel on the left, so I swiftly raced up the stairs and down the other tunnel. As soon as I turned the corner of the steps, I saw him. Ethan was odd, walking slowly towards the ammo room, walking almost like he was asleep. Ethan made his way towards the ammo room and stepped inside. I chased after him, calling his name, believing him to be playing a prank on me. I called after him again to relay the message about dinner, and eventually, with a determined walk, I entered the ammo room. The empty ammo room. I was in shock. Was I dehydrated? Going crazy? I found myself spinning in circles, crouching to look in the corners as if I would see him there shrunken down. At least that would explain where he went, but he was just gone. I feared the worst, not really knowing what the worst was, and I decided I needed to get an adult. I now ran full speed back to the entrance of the tunnels where I saw the silhouette of the voice that had called to me earlier. As I approached the entrance of the tunnel, I was able to make out a face. It was Ethan. Ethan told me it was time for dinner. I asked him where he went, and he said that he got scared and left the tunnels after about 2 minutes. But I was in there for more than 5. I asked him what the last thing he said to me was, where exactly he went, any information he could give me that could explain what I had just seen in there. But all of his answers went to the same conclusion. It was impossible. All throughout dinner in the evening, my mind tried to explain what I had seen. Who did I see in the tunnels? Where did they go? How was Ethan in 2 places at once? My panic was temporarily set aside when the old man visited us once again. With him, he brought a large brown cardboard box, filled with framed pictures of all the army battalions that had once served here. He also brought with him a number of death certificates for soldiers that had been killed while on the fort. One was killed via cannon misfire, a couple had heart attacks, others choked. but one had been killed by an accidental fire in the ammo room. Once I realized this box might have contained an answer for me, I paid much closer attention to its contents. An old picture of soldiers in a heavy metal frame was passed to me, and what I saw only absolutely solidified my fear of what I had seen. The uniforms the soldiers were wearing were almost identical in color and shape to the uniforms us as Boy Scouts wore. I asked the old man who they were, and he told me that they were the last group of soldiers to ever work at the fort before it was shut down. He pointed at one of the men in the picture and told me that he was the one that had died due to the fire in the ammo room. At that point I knew, as I gazed into the photo and looked at a young soldier who was the spitting image of Ethan, that I had seen a spirit. I have not been to Fort Wayne since.